Specifically, no, there's also a segment that points out, unless this is better explained by
a substance abuse
things
disorder.
like meth. Yeah.
and so, I mean, the thing is, though, it's not uncommon. Well, okay, is pretty much everybody here local for the most part? Okay, I'm not going to get political, but I might. So Operation Rio Grande makes me very angry. And I'm going to try not to politicize it because its best intention has gone horribly wrong. And what you see very frequently, especially within the homeless and indigent populations, is a use of substances to self-medicate for either undiagnosed or diagnosed mental health disorders that they cannot get treatment for because Utah doesn't want to buy into the Medicaid expansion. And so that doesn't help the current state of everything. So I swear I'm not going to say go donate or any of that stuff, but take that as you will. But that being said, once again, trying not to get political, this is a very anxiety-ridden year. Last 2 years or so.
It's not an easy topic.
No.
It's a topic that brings it up. I think that's fair.
And regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, there is a lot of tension, plain and simply. And that bleeds over into our personal lives. It definitely bleeds into our online life. And the one thing that I have personally found, the one thing that seems to bind geeks together more than the Force, is anxiety. That's pretty good, I just came up with that. There's something comforting about our fandoms. There's something that helps when we can predict what's going to happen. We know the characters, we become very attached to them. And when we see something that changes how we perceive that world that we found so much comfort in, Star Wars, and we get angry, we get upset. And sometimes that anger and frustration becomes something even uglier, especially when it's like, oh, we want to try this character as a different race, a different gender, or take a different approach, and that anxiety kicks in with a lot of these people, and they want to fight it because they want it to stay the same because they found their comfort in it. A lot of ugliness can come up, and sometimes labels can get thrown out, and sometimes they're deserved, and sometimes it's the anxiety, the depression kicking in, and kind of taking over our lives, and so. It helps when we do have these positive depictions of mental health, where all of us who carry a diagnosis aren't always written as the villain in a book or a movie. I mean, there's very few. I mean, we get occasionally something like Jessica Jones, but she's a hardcore alcoholic, so I wouldn't call that healthy. I enjoy my alcohol, but still. But I'm going to stop talking at this point. I'm just going to ask the panelists here, before we get into the negative, because we got plenty of negative examples of mental health, and we'll get there. What have you found, either in any sort of medium, that you have been able to identify, or it's given you some sort of strength based off of how you've seen the characters portrayed?
For me, my main issue is conflict-based PTSD from the conflicts of the past. So one that really resonated with me, maybe it's not specifically positive, but more of a true to experience representation was Shutter Island. If anybody remembers that, with the post-traumatic stress with DiCaprio. Yeah, of course there's very much of a horror feel to it, but as far as the his flashbacks and just his total delusion in reality was very reactive, but also very a clear depiction of what I experienced as a veteran.
Oh, that's fascinating. Because just to interject, I thought it didn't do a great job, but I don't have that diagnosis.
Yep. Well, again, and everyone, we can all be diagnosed with a specific thing, but then everyone's experience is going to be different. Especially with PTSD, you know, some triggers are going to be different for others. Some are going to be positive, negative, whatever. But maybe just with Shutter Island, because it was sort of so specific to my own journey, that it really resonated with me. And it wasn't really glorifying it. Like, there was a genuine, this is a terrible thing. So it was really good.
Can I make an observation? Well, first of all, am I the only writer here? Like, that's all, oh my gosh,
Well,
I feel
Well,
terrible.
right, I was thinking the journalists.
Okay, but
I
like,
do
I'm
do
a
creative writing,
fiction, that's my only gig kind of thing, so. Just in defense of writers, yes, there are some lazy ass writers out there who just, yeah, they're like, oh, I know what crazy means. You know, I can diagnose crazy. But a lot of them too, just be aware, like they're working within the limits of a structure, and think how long the average therapy session takes, how many of those go on before you start to understand yourself, let alone other people, and you can't squeeze that into a 2-hour movie. It's just the realities, and it's about drama for them. They're, for the most part, not trying to represent something accurately, they're trying to represent it funly, or horribly, as the case may be. So just being aware of that. And the other thing is, going off what you said, you know, what are some positive or helpful or real life depictions? Here's the most real depiction is yourself as you read these stories. Because the reason we read these stories is we are defining our own mental DNA. It's one of the very few areas where we actively participate in the process of self-creation. I mean, look this way, and that's my parents' fault. I have very little to do with it, other than the fact that I try and make sure not too much hair is sprouting out of weird places, you know? But when we choose to read a story or watch a movie, a radio, whatever it is, yeah, I still listen to the radio, we are then creating new versions of ourselves that have minor at times and sometimes major echoes of the characters we're reading. I mean, the reason Lord of the Rings is so powerful is partly because it's an awesome story, and partly it's because I am Frodo. It's partly because I see Samwise and I go, that's me when I am a helper, you know, and also maybe a little bit of an enabler. And so one thing to be aware of, you know, from an entertainment, a fandom perspective is you go into these things and they rub off on you. And that's something that people with mental health problems have to be aware of. You can love a story and it can hurt you. I read a book that was so good, so neat. I knew I was going to go back to it, and I called my wife and said, rip this up, please, and throw it away. Because it was bad for me. And that's something I really like to encourage people to do, even if they don't have overt mental health issues. Choose your media wisely. And if it's doing something bad, walk out of the theater. This is different than a trigger, like PTSD, big triggers, you know. Even with other things, I see certain things that makes a reaction. So this isn't necessarily you stand up and go, I can't believe they didn't post a warning. It's just, this is starting to make me go down a bad road. It's time to leave.
Well,
And
that's
don't be
just being
afraid of that.
responsible for yourself too, which I'm a big fan of people being able to say, like, if I know my audience is going to experience a trigger, maybe I should say something, but I don't believe that it's their responsibility. I feel like it's my responsibility to take, you know, good stock of what I'm able to tolerate and then respond to that from an adult perspective. And if I can't do that, then I really shouldn't be making those decisions for myself to begin with. And that's
why I got married, so I wouldn't do that.
It doesn't stop anything.
But yeah, I actually really wanted to jump in on that original question, though. The first time I noticed that I was having similarities to a character was Sarah Connor in Terminator 2. I knew what my tendencies were. I knew what my fight or flight looked like, but I didn't understand why. And there's a scene near the end of Terminator 2 where Sarah's got her kid and she's running through this horrible space, and there's one ventilator. One of them can breathe clean air. So she sticks it on John's face for like 2 seconds and then takes it for herself. And I remember watching this with my cousins, and my cousins going like, oh, what is wrong with her? She is a terrible mother. And I'm like, no. Because if John passes out, fine. She can get him to safety. She knows what's up. She has counted her exits. She knows her strategy. If she passes out, that's it, game over. And I'm the same way. With my PTSD, I map out exits. I map out exactly where I've been. I know the layout of any space I'm in at any given time, and that's just the way that my panic takes form. So to be able to see her making a choice very quickly that's unpopular, but is well thought out, was kind of something that I related to. And with Jessica Jones as well, even though it's not the cleanest depiction, the way that they portrayed, well, not even portrayed, the direction of her flashes was very strong.
Oh yeah, that was really well done.
That
And
was
by the way, I
excellent.
wasn't criticizing, I was just saying she had a
Right, no,
coping
but I mean,
skill.
there,
But it worked for the character.
it works, but there is that contrast to be aware of. And then the third thing, and it actually doesn't directly impact me, but I'm in love with it. If you guys have not checked out the new version of The Tick that Amazon's doing, do it. Their portrayal of schizophrenia is one of the most honest and sympathetic that I've ever seen. And I'm floored, because when you do study mental health, when you do a lot of, when you're digging through case studies and you're looking through actual people's lives, you realize that the media is really cruel when it comes to schizophrenia.
Yeah.
They're really, really cruel. So to see a beautiful depiction of a family saying, hey, yeah, you've got this thing that you've got to contend with, it's cool. We're going to stand with you and we're going to make sure that you're okay. Yes, more of that, please.
That's good, because I ran into Candace at a local coffee shop, the Watchtower, and she's like, have you watched The Tick? I'm like, no. And she tells me this. I'm like, don't tell me anymore. Save it for the panel.
Yeah.
Okay, Kaitlyn, what about you?
I was trying to think, and I'm having a hard time remembering. Certainly one of the most recent ones would definitely be Jessica Jones. I don't have PTSD, but I just really loved the way that they portrayed her as somebody who, I don't want to say broken, but somebody who is really, really hurting, but at the same time is still just capable of pulling herself up, even if it means just in the worst possible way. And I really related to her ability to just carry on even when it hurt, even when it felt like it was impossible. And there's a reason why I will say that no Netflix show will ever top that first season of Jessica Jones. I don't even know how the second season can possibly top that first season. That is like pretty much TV perfection for me, and I love it. It's perfect. I think
Yeah,
it's
the arc of
great.
these didn't fall apart in the last half like all the other ones.
Really quick
Go ahead.
about Jessica Jones. This is kind of a cool thing about fandom, is we're talking about, you know, nerd things and nerd entertainment and all you beautiful geeks out there. And I love being able to sound like nerds, people, sexy nerds, nice skin. Back to you. So, no, but it's kind of neat that we have these superheroes because so many of their lives are rooted in disaster and pain. And if you don't want to raise your hands, that's fine, but if you're comfortable with it, how many people here have been in so much pain, physical, mental, whatever, that they feel like if someone could come along and say, here's your oblivion pill, you would have taken it right now. Okay? And one of the things that I hate when people say to me, as someone who's depressed, who has such extreme depression and things like that, is they go, you just have to hold on and remember that it'll be okay. You know, just remember that. And I'm like, that's a stupid thing to say. If I could remember crap like that, I wouldn't do this to myself. And sometimes we're so far removed from hope, it's impossible to even hope for anything. And the superheroes are great because they all go in those same places, like the really good ones. I mean, if you think about Batman, obviously he's rooted in horror. Superman, he's a product of a genocidal destruction in some stories, or such a massive, you know, physical disaster. He's the ultimate orphan, ultimate displacement. He is constantly, think about Superman, know that if you sneezed, you could blow somebody's skin off. Like, talk about a tough life. And so they're so far removed from hope that I think sometimes we find echoes of ourselves. Something that I tell other people that are suffering this, I go, you can't hope for happiness, but sometimes you can hope that you'll be able to hope for happiness. And remember, not shoot for tomorrow's gonna be a great day, but shoot for tomorrow I'll feel good enough to remember that there are great days. And so many of our stories now, like the Jessica Jones and all these, there's this moment where they realize everything's gone, they have nothing, And the fact that they go and fight the bad guy, that's not the triumph. The triumph is the point where they've got their head in their hands and they look up. That's the triumph.
And I think that moment was really well portrayed in Spider-Man: Homecoming. Just in that moment of complete despair after he's been, spoiler, crushed, right? And doesn't think that he can fight any further, and he reverts back into that. He's no longer sure of himself. He goes back to being a child and crying out for help, and then he kind of realizes, well, excuse my language, but shit, I can actually get myself out of this. And that's a huge revelation for him, because if in the movie he's had, you know, he's used his suit as a crutch that Tony Stark gave him, and he's convinced that there's nothing else that he can do. Like those things make him. And when he realizes, you know, granted, most of the time if we get bit by a radioactive spider, we're going to have cancer and die, but he uses that, and then in the end, I think this is the one thing that I really love that they finally did with Spider-Man. They had him save the bad guy, and not just have him like killed by, you know, random objects, or like the original Spider-Man where Green Goblin is impaled on his own wing board, or anything like that. He goes out of his way, like that. The ends that he goes to save, it's about to say Condor Man.